What if I told you that a French billionaire once laughed at a child on a Manila street, not because of a joke, but because of an accent? That on a night of neon lights and humid air, a man who moved billions with a phone call looked at a Filipino boy selling candy, heard his trembling English, and smirked as if a whole nation were something to outgrow. Some who saw it said, "He's just being honest." Others felt something inside them tighten, as if a quiet line had been crossed. What none of them knew was that within days, on those same crowded sidewalks, this child he dismissed would become the mirror he could not escape, and Manila itself would begin to dismantle the story he told himself about wealth, worth, and who is truly poor. He was not a man who believed in chance, or sentiment, or anything that could not be calculated on a screen. Étienne Marchand had built his empire on algorithms sharp enough to cut through markets. At 43, he managed more money than some nations. Traders whispered his name the way sailors once whispered the wind. In Paris, he lived above the skyline. In Singapore, he lived on the water. In Dubai, he lived inside marble. He measured life by return rates, not relationships. If someone cried, he saw instability. If someone hesitated, he saw risk. If someone failed, he saw a bad asset. Empathy was not on his balance sheet. He never planned to come to Manila. For him, the Philippines was a place his analysts categorized as developing, a polite financial word meaning irrelevant. But a Southeast Asian merger forced him to visit $2 billion at stake. He arrived with a schedule, measured to the minute, a suite waiting in Makati, and an unspoken assumption that the city would bend around his expectations. The first thing he noticed was the heat. The second was the chaos. Jeepneys rattling, horns layered like a restless symphony, street vendors calling out with melodic urgency. Everything felt too loud, too alive, too unpredictable, three traits Étienne had spent his life eliminating. That evening, he stepped out of his hotel to walk before dinner. His assistant begged him to take a car, but he refused. "I want to see the city," he said, though what he meant was, "I want to evaluate the inefficiencies." And then he saw the boy, thin, barefoot, holding a small box of candy pressed to his chest like a fragile secret. 11, maybe 12. His shirt oversized, his eyes too old for his face. The boy stepped toward him, with a careful bravery. Good evening, sir," the boy said, English trembling like a leaf in wind. "You want sea candy?" Étienne slowed just enough for annoyance to form. The boy's accent made the sentence wobble. It was small, human, earnest, everything Étienne had trained himself not to hear. He let out a short laugh. Not cruel, but dismissive. The laugh of a man who had never needed kindness from anyone. "You should learn to speak properly," Étienne murmured, loud enough for the boy and the passing crowd. "This city, it teaches you nothing." The boy blinked, as if hit by something invisible. But he didn't run. He simply nodded, clutching his box tighter, and whispered, "Sorry, sir," with a quiet dignity that did not match his trembling hands. Étienne kept walking. To him, the exchange was already forgotten. But Manila remembers differently. That night, back in the hotel, something strange happened. Étienne couldn't focus. His mind, trained for numbers, not emotions, kept returning to the look in the boy's eyes. Not shame, not hurt, something deeper. A quiet strength he could not categorize. He brushed it away. Feelings were noise. Noise was bad for decisions. The next day, his meetings spiraled. A miscommunication, a delayed signature, a market swing that made headlines. Assistants ran in and out with the kind of tension Étienne hated. A tension that said, "You're not in control." By late afternoon, he needed air. He walked again, same street, same neon hum, same restless Manila heartbeat. And then, the unexpected. A sudden shout, a blur of motion. Two teenagers on a motorbike, tearing through the street, heading straight toward a cluster of pedestrians, including Étienne. For a fraction of a second, he froze. Numbers couldn't save him here. Wealth couldn't shield him. And the world felt terrifyingly fragile. A hand grabbed him. Small, but certain. a force that yanked him out of the motorbike's path with the instincts of someone who'd survived this city far longer than he'd lived. Étienne staggered, breath punched out of him, and when he looked up, it was the boy. The same one. Barefoot, thin, trembling, yet the only solid thing in that chaotic moment. "You okay, sir?" the boy asked. No stutter this time. Just concern. People nearby nodded at the boy with familiarity. He'd done this before. Saved others before. Étienne opened his mouth, but no words came. It was the first time in years his mind had no script. Only silence. And the echo of his own laughter from the night before, cheap, hollow, cruel. Something inside him shifted. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to unsettle the life he built on certainty. Enough for Manila to enter the cracks. Enough for the story to begin. The morning after the near miss in the street, Manila woke beneath a pale, hazy sky, the kind that makes the whole city feel like it is still deciding between rain and heat. From his hotel window, Étienne watched the movement below as if observing a chart. People flowing like data points, vehicles drifting like lines of code, the city pulsing with a kind of unplanned logic he did not yet understand. His schedule waited on the table behind him, printed, color-coded, framed by the confidence of a man who believed he could bend time with a signature. But something in him hesitated. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if every meeting on it belonged to another life. Without calling his driver, he walked out of the hotel alone. No entourage, no assistant with a tablet, no translator murmuring in his ear. Just his polished shoes stepping into a world of cracked sidewalks, jeepneys painted with saints and slogans, and vendors arranging trays of food that steamed in the morning air. The city met him with a density of life he was not prepared for. The smell of fried garlic and exhaust, the sound of distant church bells tangled with car horns, the sight of laundry hanging like prayer flags between buildings that seemed too tired to stand and yet somehow did. He tried to tell himself he was only observing, collecting information the way he always had. But the numbers were missing. The graphs were gone. There was only the unfiltered face of Manila, a woman humming as she swept the front of a tiny store, an old man carefully arranging single cigarettes in a row, children laughing over an improvised game, their bare feet slapping the pavement like a heartbeat. He turned onto the narrow street where it had happened. The night before, it had been neon and noise. Now, it was softer, almost tender. Morning vendors, a few school uniforms, a dog sleeping beneath a tricycle. For a moment he wondered if he had imagined the whole thing, if his mind had invented the boy to ease some guilt he did not want to admit. Then, he saw him. The same thin frame, the same oversized shirt, the same small box of candy, pressed against his chest like something worth guarding. The boy was speaking to a woman in a faded blouse, offering her a piece of candy with a shy smile. She shook her head, laughed, and ruffled his hair before walking away. The boy did not look offended. He simply adjusted the box and turned toward the street again, eyes alert, posture patient, as if rejection were just part of the weather. Étienne stood there, unsure how to approach. He was a man who negotiated with prime ministers and billionaires, yet in that moment he felt strangely clumsy, like a child about to speak a language he had only read in books. The boy saw him. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something more complicated. Surprise, a hint of caution, and then an openness Étienne did not think he deserved. "Good morning, sir," the boy said, his English steadier now, shaped by effort rather than fear. "You are okay?" "I am," Étienne answered, his voice quieter than usual. "Because of you." The words felt heavy in his mouth. He was not used to owing anyone anything, especially someone the world would label poor. But here, in this narrow Manila street, the balance of power had already been rewritten by something as simple as a hand reaching out at the right moment. The boy shifted his weight, unsure what to do with the gratitude of a man in an expensive shirt. "You want candy, sir?" he asked, lifting the box. "I have mint, chocolate, local flavor also." Étienne almost smiled. It would have been easy to buy the whole box, to turn generosity into another transaction, to tip heavily and walk away with the comfort that he had helped. Money had always been his shield, his way of controlling outcomes. But looking at the boy's face, he understood dimly, for the first time that what the child had given him could not be repaid in cash. "What is your name?" Étienne asked instead. The boy straightened, surprised by the question. "Miguel, sir." "Miguel," Étienne repeated, tasting the unfamiliar syllables, letting them sit on his tongue like a word from a world he'd never cared to know. "I am Étienne." Miguel nodded with the slow dignity of someone who has learned to read character more than clothing. "Nice to meet you, Sir Étienne." The cars passed. A jeepney full of students rumbled by, painted with words about grace and favor that Étienne did not fully understand. Somewhere nearby, a radio played a worship song in Tagalog, the melody rising above the noise in a way that felt almost indecently hopeful. For a moment they simply stood there, billionaire and boy, sharing the same slice of cracked pavement, breathing the same humid air. "You sell here every day?" Étienne asked. Miguel nodded. "Mostly here. Sometimes other street. When tourists come, better. And school," Étienne pressed, the old analytical habit returning, wanting the facts, wanting to place this child in a category. "Do you go?" A shadow passed through Miguel's eyes. "I stop, sir. My mama, sick sometime. We need money more." He said it plainly, without complaint, as if the sentence were simply another item on the list of things that were, maybe, again later. God knows. Étienne had heard people invoke God many times in boardrooms, in speeches, in the shallow prayers said before expensive dinners. But on Miguel's lips, the words did not sound like part of a performance. They sounded like a rope tied to something he could not see, held firmly by a hand that had learned to cling rather than let go. Without quite knowing why, Étienne asked, "Do you like this city?" Miguel looked around as if seeing Manila from the outside for the first time. He saw the cracks, the noise, the perpetual hustle of people trying to survive. Then he smiled. Small, but unashamed. "It is home, sir," he said simply. "Sometimes hard, sometimes beautiful, if you look right." The sentence landed in Étienne's chest with unexpected weight. The day before, he had dismissed Manila as chaotic, inefficient, a place that teaches you nothing. Now he stood before a boy who had learned courage, sacrifice, and gratitude on these very streets. It was a kind of education his elite schools had never mentioned. They spoke a little longer. Miguel told him about his mother, who prayed every morning before he left to sell candy. About the church down the alley, where people sang with a kind of hunger in their voices. About nights when the rain would flood the street, and he would still stand there, holding his little box of sweets under a thin plastic cover, trusting that someone would stop. As he listened, Étienne felt something he rarely allowed himself: slowness. There was no timer running, no assistant reminding him of the next appointment. Time seemed to stretch, making room for details he would have ignored in any other city. The way the light caught on a puddle, turning dirty water into a brief mirror. The way a woman shared a piece of bread with a stranger, while both waited for a jeepney. The way people laughed here, full-bodied, even when their clothes told you they had very little. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Another message, another escalation, another reminder that the financial world he commanded was moving without him. Normally, he would have answered immediately. Now, he let it buzz and fade. "Sir?" Miguel asked gently, noticing the distraction. "You have to go?" "Yes," Étienne replied. "But I will come back, if that is all right." Miguel's face lit up with an eagerness he tried to hide. "Of course, sir. I am here most days, God willing." On his way back to the hotel, the city no longer looked like a problem to be solved. It looked like a living parable he did not yet know how to read. The traffic was still thick, the heat still heavy, the poverty still undeniable. But beneath it all, like a quiet underground river, he sensed a resilience that disturbed him more than any market crash ever had. These people had so little, and yet they seemed to possess something he had never owned, despite all his wealth. A way of belonging to one another, and to a God they spoke of as if he were not an idea, but a presence. Later that night, alone in his room, Étienne opened his laptop to study charts and forecasts. But the lines blurred. The numbers refused to arrange themselves into the familiar patterns of profit and loss. Every time he tried to focus, he saw Miguel's eyes, heard his small voice saying, "It is home. Sir, sometimes hard, sometimes beautiful, if you look right." He closed the screen. For the first time in years, the glow of data felt cold to him. He sat in the dim light, listening to the muted sounds of Manila, drifting up from the street. A distant karaoke song, a child laughing, a vendor calling out the price of something cheap enough to keep someone alive for one more day. He did not pray. He did not know how. But he sat there, still, unable to shake the sense that something, or someone, was beginning to write a different equation in the quiet places of his heart. He didn't know it then, but his heart had already begun to change. Night descended on Manila as if someone had lowered a curtain of rain over the whole city. The storm did not roar, it pressed, slow and heavy, until the sky felt like it was leaning its weight on the buildings. Étienne Marchand watched it from the back seat of a taxi, the windows blurring with rivers of water, each streak reflecting lights that trembled like something alive. He was on his way to the public hospital, where Miguel had taken his mother. A man like him should have gone to meetings, to crisis calls, to screens glowing red with financial alarm. Instead, he was following a boy with a box of candy into the heart of Manila's fragile underbelly. His phone vibrated relentlessly. "Étienne, the Manila deal is collapsing. You need to exit now. The rumor mill is out of control. You pull out, or the fund bleeds. This is a developing country. They're used to instability." Another voice whispered the thing everyone else tiptoed around. "If you stay in this deal now, you're the one who will sink." He ended the calls one by one. Each word deepened the crack inside him. A crack that began the moment Miguel pulled him from danger on a rain-soaked street. His world was splitting. Profit versus compassion. Power versus humility. The life he built versus the truth he had avoided. For the first time, Étienne felt fear, not of losing money, but of losing himself. The taxi came to a stop. Water pooled around the tires. The hospital entrance glowed faintly, a tired light trying to hold its place against the storm. He stepped out. Rain soaked him instantly, flattening the expensive fabric against his skin until he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man stripped of all the armor he had ever worn. Inside, the waiting room overflowed with lives in motion, mothers with feverish children, old men shivering under thin blankets, nurses moving with an exhaustion that looked dangerously close to breaking. The air smelled of antiseptic and hunger, fear and endurance. And there, at the end of a row of plastic chairs, was Miguel, small, soaked, holding his mother's hand with both of his. The sight pierced Étienne with a quiet violence. He approached without speaking. Miguel looked up, and despite the worry on his face, a small smile formed. "You came, sir," the boy whispered. That sentence, the gentleness of it, shattered something final inside him. The richest man in the room suddenly felt like the poorest. A nurse approached, clipboard tucked against her chest, hair pulled tight in a bun that had loosened during the long shift. Her eyes were rimmed with fatigue, but her movements were steady, almost tender. She checked the woman's chest, adjusted her oxygen tube, and murmured something in Tagalog that made Miguel nod. Étienne asked, "Can she stay? Does she need better care?" The nurse glanced at him, noticing the wet clothes, the foreign face, the kind of concern that did not match the suit. "She can stay," she said softly, "but she must fight, and we will fight with her." Her voice held no drama, no despair, only conviction shaped by years of carrying strangers' suffering when she had little left for her own. As she turned away, Étienne realized this was the first angel, not winged, not glowing, but faithful in her tiredness, holy in her persistence. Another figure appeared, a hospital chaplain with a weathered Bible soft from use. He stopped beside Miguel, rested a hand lightly on the mother's bedframe, and asked, "Would you like me to read, my child?" Miguel nodded. "For my mama," he said. "And for my friend." He pointed to Étienne. Friend. A word no market report had ever granted him. The chaplain opened his Bible and read with a steady, low voice that carried through the noise of machines and murmured prayers. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34:18. The verse did not echo upward. It sank downward into the floor, the machines, the rain, into the cracks inside a French billionaire who had spent his life believing nothing divine intervened in human affairs. Yet here, in a crowded public hospital, these words had the weight of truth. The chaplain closed his Bible, but something remained open inside Étienne, a door he had shut long ago. The storm intensified. Thunder rolled across the sky as if some ancient voice were clearing its throat. In the thunder, Étienne heard the sound of a life collapsing, not the financial one, but the one built on pride, indifference, and the lie that strength meant never needing anyone. Miguel's mother coughed weakly. The boy leaned close, whispering a prayer so soft it trembled like a candle flame in wind. Étienne watched him, watched the unwavering tenderness, the faith stronger than the storm, and felt something long forgotten rise in him. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. Miguel nodded. "Yes, but I know God is near, even in this storm." Étienne swallowed. He wanted to believe that. He desperately needed to believe that. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel everything he had been running from. The loneliness of a man, adored for his money, not his heart. The emptiness of boardrooms filled with victories that tasted like ash. The guilt of dismissing a boy whose dignity was greater than his own. Pain surged through him not from loss, but from revelation. He covered his face. His shoulders shook. Tears fell hot, ungoverned, unplanned. The billionaire wept, not in shame, but in surrender. Miguel placed a hand on his arm. A small gesture. A child comforting a man who had finally admitted he could not save himself. "It's okay, sir," Miguel whispered. "You can cry. Sometimes that is how God brings the light in." And that sentence, gentle, innocent, prophetic, became the hinge of the night. In that moment, Étienne knew that the true storm was not the one outside the hospital. It was the one inside him, and it was passing. Slowly, quietly, something like peace began to settle. Not certainty, not solutions, just peace. A stillness that felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. A healing that did not erase the wound, but honored it. Hours passed. Nurses moved like quiet angels between beds. The storm softened, then retreated into distant thunder. Miguel fell asleep, with his head resting on his mother's arm. The chaplain whispered a final blessing before slipping out into the fading rain. And Étienne sat there, soaked, exhausted, emptied, feeling something new inside him. A calm that had no cause, a light that had no source, a presence he could not name. He looked at Miguel, at the boy's steady breathing, at the woman fighting for hers, at the nurse, charting vital signs with the devotion of someone performing a sacred duty. He whispered, not sure to whom, "Thank you." It was not a prayer he had planned. It was simply the truth. Not everything was fixed. Not every fear had faded. Not every broken thing was mended. But the storm inside him had finally become still. And he knew without fully understanding that this was the beginning of a different life. A life shaped not by power, but by compassion. Not by control, but by surrender. Not by wealth, but by a psalm whispered in a Manila hospital on a rain-soaked night. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And for the first time in his life, Étienne Marchand felt what it meant to finally, quietly, come close to him. Night gave way slowly, as if it, too, wished to linger a little longer over the quiet miracle unfolding in the hospital ward. Dawn came softly, brushing the windows with a pale gold that turned rainwater into threads of light. The storm had passed, but the room still held the memory of it, like a breath held too long and finally released. Miguel stirred first. He sat up straight, rubbing sleep from his eyes, then looked quickly at his mother. Her breathing was easier now, still fragile, still a climb, but steadier than the night before. Relief filled his small face, a quiet joy that belonged entirely to children who have learned that hope often arrives slowly, like sunrise. Étienne watched in silence. He had not slept, but he was not tired. There was a stillness inside him, unlike anything he had known, a quiet pool forming where chaos used to live. A nurse passed by and offered a gentle nod. "She is improving," she said softly. "It will be a long road, but she is stronger today," Miguel whispered. "Thank you, God." A prayer shaped without effort, like breathing. Then he turned to the man beside him, the stranger who had become something else entirely. "Sir Étienne," he said quietly, "you stayed all night." Étienne didn't know how to explain that he hadn't stayed out of duty, nor pity, nor guilt. He had stayed because something sacred had opened inside him, and he could not walk away from it. He simply answered, "I wanted to be here." Miguel smiled, small, knowing, warm. Outside, the city was waking. Vendors returned to the streets, sweeping rainwater aside with brooms made of coconut fiber. Jeepneys rumbled to life, their exhaust rising into the morning air like incense from a living cathedral. Life had resumed with its weight, its noise, its beauty, yet Étienne felt as though he were seeing Manila for the first time. Not as a problem, not as an investment, not as a place to extract value, but as a teacher. A city that breaks a man open the way. Storms break open the sky so that light can enter. Later, when Miguel's mother was moved to a more stable room, Étienne stepped outside for a moment. The ground was still wet. Puddles reflected a sky washed clean, like a heart that had cried until peace arrived. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages, demands, warnings, urgent instructions. He read a few. Then he did something he had never done in his career. He breathed. He paused. He chose stillness over fear. A decision formed not loud, not dramatic, but steady as dawn itself. He would restructure the deal. He would protect the workers. He would face whatever storm came from his partners. And he would not run from the place that had given him back his heart. Manila had taken him apart, and Manila had made him whole again. When he returned to the hospital corridor, Miguel stood waiting for him. Candy box tucked under his arm, eyes bright with gratitude. "Sir," the boy said softly, "you helped us. I don't know why God sent you here, but I'm glad he did." Étienne knelt, so they were eye to eye. "No, Miguel," he answered. "You helped me. More than you know." The boy tilted his head, puzzled. Children seldom understand the transformations they ignite. Étienne placed a hand on the candy box. It was dented and worn, yet it had become, in some quiet and holy way, the symbol of a life he no longer wanted to return to. "Keep this close," he said. "It has more courage inside it than any empire I ever built." Miguel nodded solemnly, as if accepting something of great value. Before he left, Étienne stood for a moment at the doorway of the ward. The sunlight had reached the foot of the bed where Miguel's mother rested, warm as a blessing. Nurses moved gently between patients. People whispered prayers in Tagalog and English alike. And for the first time in his life, Étienne understood that holiness was not reserved for cathedrals. Sometimes it bloomed in places where suffering and love met in equal measure. In a Manila hospital, on a storm-washed morning, within a heart rediscovering how to be human, he stepped outside. The air was cool. The world felt new. He closed his eyes and breathed a simple truth into the brightening day. Silence, light, gratitude.